April 1945. Somewhere in the shattered remnants of Bavaria, a general sits alone. His name was General Hans Blasowitz, Wehrmacht, a professional soldier in an army that had ceased to be professional years ago. He had commanded men across Poland, France, and the Eastern Front. He had seen victory turn to ash. And now, in this room, with the sound of American engines growing louder by the hour, he sat contemplating a choice that was no choice at all. The Luger pistol on his desk gleamed in the afternoon light filtering through broken shutters. Its weight was familiar, comforting, almost. He had carried this weapon for 20 years. It had never failed him. But now, as his fingers traced the grip worn smooth by 2 decades of service, he wondered if he had the courage to use it one final time. The room smelled of must and old paper. Outside, the sound of diesel engines growled closer. American voices barked orders in that harsh, nasal English. The conquerors were coming, and with them, justice. Or what they would call justice. General Blasowitz had not slept in 3 days. His uniform, once immaculate Prussian gray-green, was streaked with the dust of retreat. The red stripe down his trousers, marking his rank, was faded and torn. His Iron Cross First Class still hung at his throat, but it felt heavier now, like a millstone, like evidence at a trial. He had dismissed his adjutant hours ago, sent the boy home to his mother in Munich, if Munich still existed. The reports coming in were confused, contradictory, apocalyptic. Entire cities gone. Armies that existed only on paper. A Führer who had descended into a bunker and seemingly into madness itself. But Blasowitz remained. Not out of loyalty to the regime. That loyalty had died somewhere between Kursk and the Falaise Gap. He remained because of something older than the Reich. Something that predated the swastika and the Roman salutes and all the theatrical madness of the past 12 years. He remained because a Prussian officer does not run. The pistol offered one escape: oblivion. The same exit taken by thousands of his fellow officers in these final days. The coward's way out, some would say. But in April of 1945, in a Germany that was being devoured from all sides, suicide had become almost respectable, almost expected. Field Marshal Model had done it just days ago, put his service pistol to his head in a forest rather than face capture. General Bergdorf, General Krebs, the list grew longer by the hour. Men of rank and honor choosing the bullet over the noose. But something stopped Blasowitz from pulling that trigger. Not hope. Hope had died at Stalingrad, frozen in the snow with 300,000 men. Not duty. Duty had been perverted into something monstrous long ago, twisted into an obligation to follow orders that no moral man could follow. Number. What stopped General Blasowitz was something more primal, more human. He wanted to explain himself. To someone. Anyone. He wanted to stand before his enemy and say, "I was a soldier, not a monster. I followed orders, yes, but I was not them. I was not SS. I was not Gestapo. I was Wehrmacht. I was professional. I was honorable." Even as he thought these words, he knew how hollow they sounded, how insufficient, how pathetic. The engines outside grew louder. To understand this moment, to understand why a decorated German general would beg for a firing squad, and why what he received instead would haunt him more than any bullet, we must first understand the world he lived in. A world that was ending. Violently. Completely. Irreversibly. Germany in April 1945 was not a nation. It was a funeral pyre. The 1,000-year Reich, promised to last a millennium, had consumed itself in just 12 years. The cities were rubble. Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, Cologne. Names that once conjured images of Gothic cathedrals and concert halls now meant only ash and twisted steel. The armies were dissolving. Units that had once conquered continents now consisted of old men and children, armed with obsolete rifles and suicidal fanaticism. And everywhere, was the knowledge that justice was coming. But what kind of justice? The German officer corps knew what was being uncovered. The camps, the mass graves, the industrial machinery of genocide that had operated in the shadows of the war they thought they were fighting. Some had participated. Others had looked away. But all of them understood that the world would not distinguish between the SS and the Wehrmacht, between the fanatic and the professional, between the monster and the soldier. They would all hang together. This is what made the pistol so attractive. This is why so many officers, men who had faced Russian T-34s and British artillery without flinching, now put bullets in their own brains. Not because they were cowards, but because they understood something fundamental about human nature. A man can face death with dignity. He cannot face humiliation. In the Prussian military tradition, the tradition that had shaped men like Blasowitz since childhood, there were rules. Old rules. Rules that predated nationalism and ideology. A captured officer was to be treated with respect, professional courtesy between warriors. The victor salutes the vanquished. The vanquished surrenders his sword with honor intact. But these were not normal times, and the victors were not interested in honor. The Soviets were already demonstrating what defeat meant. Officers hung from lampposts. Entire units marched into Siberia, never to return. Women raped. Children murdered. The Red Army was not interested in professional courtesy. They remembered Leningrad. They remembered the Einsatzgruppen. They remembered 27 million dead. And the Americans? The British? They spoke of war crimes trials, of Nuremberg, of hanging men in suits and ties, dangling from gallows like common criminals. No, better the pistol. Better oblivion than that. General Blasowitz picked up the Luger, checked the magazine. 8 rounds. He would need only 1. Outside, the engine stopped. Car doors slammed. Boots on cobblestones. American voices, young and casual, calling to each other in that incomprehensible slang. "Hey, Sarge, this the place?" "Yeah, intelligence says there's a Kraut general hold up here." "Think he'll fight?" "Nah, they're all done. Probably offed himself already." Blasowitz listened to these voices and felt a strange calm descend. They sounded so young, so certain, so alive. He set the pistol down gently and stood. He would not give them the satisfaction of finding a corpse. He would face them, face his judgment. And perhaps, in those final moments, he would find the words to explain the unexplainable, to justify the unjustifiable. Or perhaps he would simply ask for what he deserved, a quick death by firing squad, a soldier's death, the last dignity left to him. The boots were on the stairs now. General Blasowitz straightened his uniform, adjusted his iron cross, stood at attention, and waited for the door to open. Act 2. The Monster at the Door. 5 to 10. The door didn't burst open. It wasn't kicked in by combat boots or shattered by rifle butts. It simply opened. Slowly. Almost politely. This, somehow, was more terrifying. 3 American soldiers entered first. They moved with the casual confidence of men who had already won. No hurry, no panic. One of them was chewing gum, working his jaw in that distinctively American way that German propaganda had mocked for years. Another had his helmet pushed back on his head, revealing a shock of red hair and a face that couldn't have been more than 20 years old. They carried their rifles, but loosely, not aimed, not ready to fire, just there. present. A reminder of who held the power now. The contrast could not have been more stark. General Blasowitz stood, rigid, every muscle locked in Prussian discipline, his spine straight as a rifle barrel, his jaw set, his eyes forward. This was how a German officer stood. This was how a man of his tradition faced death. The Americans looked like they were on a lunch break. "You the general?" the sergeant asked, his voice flat, Midwestern, bored. Blasowitz nodded once, a curt military acknowledgement. "Anyone else here?" "No." "Any weapons besides that pea shooter on the desk?" "No." "Booby traps?" "No." The sergeant nodded, seemed satisfied, and spoke into a radio handset. "Clear. Bring him up." Him. Blasowitz felt his stomach tighten. He had heard the rumors. Everyone had heard the rumors. About the American general commanding Third Army. About the man they called Old Blood and Guts. About George S. Patton. The Germans had many names for him. Some called him the Cowboy, because of his pearl-handled revolvers and his swaggering theatrical manner. Others called him der Kriegsgott, the war god, because of his seemingly supernatural ability to appear where he was least expected, to strike with devastating force, to win battles that should have been unwinnable. But mostly, they called him der Teufel, the devil. Not because he was cruel. The Germans could respect cruelty. They had practiced it themselves. No, Patton was called the devil because he was unpredictable, ungovernable, a force of nature wrapped in a general's uniform. The German high command had studied him obsessively. They had collected every scrap of intelligence, every intercepted communication, every rumor. They knew he had been born to wealth, to privilege. They knew he believed in reincarnation, claimed to have fought in previous lives as a Roman legionnaire, as a Napoleonic cavalry officer, as a soldier in 100 different wars across history. They knew he was arrogant, profane, brilliant, and possibly insane. They knew he had slapped shell-shocked soldiers and called them cowards, nearly ending his career. They knew he had driven his tanks faster and farther than anyone thought possible, outrunning his own supply lines, ignoring orders, improvising, attacking, always attacking. They knew that when his Third Army had broken out of Normandy, it had moved so fast that German units were still receiving orders to defend positions that Patton had captured 3 days earlier. They knew that he hated Germans, not with the ideological hatred of the Nazis, but with something older, something personal. He called them Huns, barbarians. He spoke openly of his desire to kill them, to crush them, to drive all the way to Moscow if they let him. And they knew one more thing, perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. George S. Patton believed in honor. Not the corrupted, politicized honor of the Third Reich, not the honor that could be twisted to justify genocide and war crimes, but the ancient, brutal honor of warriors. The honor that demanded courage, that respected a worthy enemy, that insisted on fighting clean, even in the dirtiest of wars. This made him unpredictable, dangerous, because a man motivated by honor doesn't always do what's logical, or safe, or politically expedient. He does what his code demands. Blasowitz had commanded men against the Americans for months now. He had studied their tactics, their equipment, their morale. The average American soldier was soft, he had thought at first, undisciplined, unwilling to take casualties, too dependent on their superior firepower and logistics. But Patton's men were different. They fought like they had something to prove. They took risks. They attacked when defense would have been wiser. They seemed to share their commander's belief that audacity was a virtue, that hesitation was sin, that the only unforgivable failure was to stop moving forward. And now, he was coming here, to this room, to pass judgment. Blasowitz heard him before he saw him. The voice carried up the stairs, that distinctive American bark, sharp and profane. "Where is he? Upstairs? Good. Anyone wounded? No? Then what the hell are you all standing around for? Get the building secured. Check for documents. I want everything. You understand? Everything. Letters, orders, maps, his goddamn laundry list. Move!" Then boots on stairs. Purposeful. Unhurried, but unrelenting. The door opened again, and there he stood. General George S. Patton, Jr. was not a large man, perhaps 5'11", perhaps 180 pounds, but he filled the doorway like he was 7 feet tall. He wore combat uniform with an elegance that seemed impossible. The 4 stars on his helmet gleamed. The ivory-handled revolvers on his hips looked more like ceremonial swords than firearms. His face was weathered, aristocratic, with pale blue eyes that seemed to look through you rather than at you. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, studying Blasowitz with the clinical interest of a scientist examining a specimen. Blasowitz met his gaze. Held it. This, at least, he could do. A German officer does not look away. Patton's expression was unreadable. Not angry, not contemptuous, not triumphant, just assessing. Finally, he stepped into the room. His aide, a nervous-looking captain, followed, carrying a leather portfolio. The 3 enlisted men stepped back, giving the general space. The room suddenly felt very small. Patton walked slowly around the desk, his eyes taking in every detail. The maps on the wall, now meaningless. The empty coffee cup. The Luger. He paused at the pistol, picked it up, checked it with the practiced ease of a man who knew weapons intimately, then set it down again. "You speak English?" Patton's voice was higher than Blasowitz had expected, almost nasal, but it carried absolute authority. "Yes, some." "Good. That'll make this easier." Patton sat on the edge of the desk, a casual gesture that would have been unthinkable in the German military. A general did not sit on furniture like a common soldier, but Patton seemed unaware of the breach of protocol. Or perhaps he was very aware and simply didn't care. "Your name?" "General Major Hans Blasowitz, Wehrmacht. Service number..." Patton waved a hand, cutting him off. "I don't give a damn about your service number. What did you command?" "The 89th Infantry Division. Before that, 12th Panzer. Before that, Eastern Front?" "Yes." "France?" "Yes." "Poland?" A pause. "Yes." Patton nodded slowly, as if confirming something. "So you've been in this from the beginning." "I have served since 1925. "That's not what I asked." Patton's eyes were very blue, very cold. "I asked if you've been in this." He gestured vaguely, indicating everything, the war, the Reich, the horror of it all. "From the beginning." Blasowitz felt something crack inside him. The careful control he had maintained, the Prussian discipline, the facade of the professional soldier. It all suddenly seemed ridiculous. Pathetic. "I have been a soldier my entire life," he said quietly. "That's still not an answer." Act 3, The Encounter, 10 to 15. Silence filled the room. Not the empty silence of absence, but the heavy silence of things unsaid. Things that could not be said. Things that both men understood without words. General Blasowitz had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in the past 3 days. He had imagined angry interrogations, theatrical denunciations, perhaps even immediate execution. He had prepared speeches in his mind, explanations of how a professional soldier could serve a monstrous regime while maintaining his personal honor. But Patton wasn't interrogating him, wasn't denouncing him, wasn't doing anything that Blasowitz had anticipated. He was just waiting. The American general sat on the edge of the desk, one leg swinging slightly, those pale eyes never leaving Blasowitz's face. He seemed content to let the silence stretch, to let it become uncomfortable, to let it work on the German general's nerves like water on stone. And it was working. "General Patton," Blasowitz began, his English careful, accented. "I wish to make a request." "I'm sure you do." "I am aware of what your forces have discovered. The camps, the..." He struggled for words that could encompass the incomprehensible. "The atrocities." Patton's expression didn't change. "I wish you to know that I had no part in such things. I was Wehrmacht, regular army. I fought your forces in open battle. I commanded men in combat. I did not. I was not." He stopped. The words sounded hollow even to his own ears. "Go on," Patton said quietly. "I commanded soldiers, not executioners. I fought a war. Not genocide." "Did you?" It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Flat. Final. Blasowitz felt his carefully constructed arguments crumbling. "I know that you may not believe this. I know that my uniform, my service, my rank, I know these things condemn me. I understand that there must be justice. I accept this. Very noble of you. I ask only..." Blasowitz straightened his shoulders, drew himself to attention. "I ask only for a soldier's death. Court-martial if you wish. Evidence if you require it. But in the end, a firing squad. Not a rope, not a hangman. I am a professional officer. I have commanded men in combat. I have faced your forces with honor. I ask to die with honor." Patton studied him for a long moment. Then, to Blasowitz's shock, he laughed. Not a cruel laugh, not mocking, but genuinely amused, as if he had just heard an unexpected joke. "You ask for honor," Patton said, shaking his head. "Jesus Christ. You people kill your way across half the world, and then you want honor at the end of it." "I am not asking for mercy." "No, you're asking for something harder. You're asking me to validate your delusion that you were somehow separate from all of it. That you could serve Hitler's Germany and keep your hands clean. That you could facilitate genocide and still call yourself a professional soldier." The words hit like physical blows. Blasowitz felt his face burning. "I did not facilitate..." "You held the line on the Eastern Front, yes?" "Yes, but..." "You tied down Soviet forces, slowed their advance, gave the Einsatzgruppen time to do their work." "I was fighting a military campaign." "You weren't fighting anything. You were the distraction, the sideshow. While you and your professional soldiers were engaged in honorable combat, other men in other units were murdering women and children by the trainload. And you knew. Don't tell me you didn't know." Blasowitz opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. There were rumors, stories. But we were soldiers. We had our orders. We had our duty." "Duty." Patton's voice dripped with contempt. "I've heard that word a lot from you people. Duty. As if it explains everything. As if following orders absolves you of thinking, of choosing, of being a human being instead of a machine." He stood up from the desk, began pacing. His aide remained by the door, silent, watching. "You want to know what I think about duty?" Patton continued. "I think duty is the excuse of cowards. I think it's what weak men hide behind when they don't want to take responsibility for their choices. You had a choice. Every day, every order, every campaign. You could have said no. And been shot? Yes." Patton stopped pacing, turned to face him directly. "And been shot. That's what courage is, General. Not following orders, not doing your duty, but standing up and saying no when no needs to be said, even if it costs you everything. Easy for you to say. Your country did not— My country? Patton's voice rose. Don't you dare talk to me about my country. We came over here to stop you. We bled and died to stop you. And yes, we did it because we were ordered to, but also because it was right. Because some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth dying for. And stopping you murdering sons of bitches was one of them. The profanity should have seemed crude, unprofessional. But somehow, coming from Patton, it carried a moral weight that Blasowitz's carefully chosen German could not match. I am asking, Blasowitz said quietly, for one clean ending. A soldier's death. Is that so much? You're asking me to make you feel better about yourself, to give you absolution, to let you die thinking you were honorable. Yes. The admission came out as a whisper. Patton walked to the window, looked out at the destroyed town below. When he spoke again, his voice was different, quieter, almost contemplative. Do you know what I believe, General? Blasowitz said nothing. I believe in reincarnation. I believe I fought in wars across thousands of years. I believe I was a soldier in ancient Rome in the Napoleonic Wars. In every great conflict in history, it sounds crazy, I know. Most people think I'm out of my mind. He turned back to face Blasowitz. But if it's true, if I have lived before, fought before, died before, then I've learned one thing. Honor isn't what you think it is. It isn't salutes and uniforms and following orders. Honor is how you behave when no one's watching, when there's no glory in it, when doing the right thing costs you everything and gains you nothing. I did what I could. You did what was easy. You followed orders. You maintained discipline. You fought your honorable professional war while the real evil happened just out of your sight. You kept your uniform clean and your conscience cleaner, and you told yourself you were different from them. Patton walked closer until he was standing directly in front of Blasowitz. The American general was slightly shorter, but somehow he seemed to tower. But here's the thing, General. You weren't different. You were essential. The whole machine needed men like you, professional soldiers who would do their jobs and not ask questions, who would fight hard enough to keep the Allies busy while the real work of the Reich got done. You were the distraction, the legitimacy, the proof that Germany was just fighting a war like any other war. What would you have me do? What would you have done? I would have rebelled. I would have sabotaged. I would have done anything to stop it. And if that meant dying, then I would have died. That's what soldiers do. We fight evil. We don't enable it. Blasowitz felt something breaking inside him. Not his composure, that was already gone. Something deeper, some fundamental belief about himself, about his service, about his entire life. Then I ask you again, he said, his voice barely audible. Grant me a firing squad. Let me die as a soldier. No. The word hung in the air between them. No? Blasowitz repeated, not understanding. I'm not going to give you what you want, Patton said. I'm not going to give you your honorable death. I'm not going to validate your fantasy that you were somehow separate from the evil you served. Then what? A trial? A hanging? I will confess to anything you wish, but please, not a rope. Not like a criminal. I am begging you. I know what you are, Patton said. You're a coward who wants an easy exit. You want me to make it quick, to make it clean, to let you die feeling like you were on the right side. He turned to his aide. Captain, what's our policy on Wehrmacht general officers? The aide consulted his portfolio. Standard POW processing, sir. Transport to interrogation center. Evaluation for war crimes. If no evidence of direct participation in atrocities, eventual release to German authorities for... There, Patton interrupted. You hear that? Standard processing. No firing squad, no court-martial, no dramatic ending. You're going to be loaded onto a truck with 100 other prisoners. You're going to sit in a camp. You're going to be interrogated by men who don't give a damn about your honor. You're going to wait. And wait. And eventually, you're going to go home. Blasowitz stared at him, uncomprehending. You're going to live, General. You're going to survive this war, and you're going to have to spend the rest of your days thinking about what you did, and what you didn't do. And you're going to have to look at yourself in the mirror every morning and ask if you were really as honorable as you think you were. That is not... You cannot... I can't. Patton's eyes were hard. I'm giving you exactly what you deserve. Not death. Life. The thing you're most afraid of. Act 4. The Punishment. 1500 to 2000. The room seemed to tilt. General Blasowitz felt his knees weaken, felt the careful control he had maintained for days finally shattering completely. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. He had prepared himself for death. Death made sense. Death had logic. Death was an ending, final, complete. The bullet or the rope, it didn't matter as long as it was over. But this was worse than any execution. You don't understand, Blasowitz heard himself saying, and hated how his voice cracked. I cannot go home. I cannot face what remains. My family, my country, everything I believed in is ash. Everything I fought for is lost. I am asking you for mercy. Mercy. Patton's expression hardened. You want to know about mercy. I've seen your mercy. I saw it at Ohrdruf. You know what that is? Blasowitz shook his head numbly. Concentration camp. My first one. We liberated it 3 weeks ago. I made my men walk through it. Made them see it. Made them smell it. You want to know what mercy looks like in your Reich, General? It looks like bodies stacked like cordwood. It looks like ovens. It looks like... Patton stopped, his jaw working, fighting for control. I'm a soldier, he continued, his voice rough. I've killed men. I've ordered men to their deaths. I've done things that would keep a normal person awake at night. But what I saw in that camp wasn't war. It wasn't combat. It wasn't soldiers fighting soldiers. It was murder. Industrial murder. And it was done by men wearing the same uniform you're wearing. I was not SS. I was not... I know what you were. Patton's voice cracked like a whip. You were the acceptable face. You were the proof that Germany was still civilized, still honorable, still fighting a war by the rules. While the murder factories ran day and night, you, and men like you, played at being professional soldiers. You gave the whole enterprise legitimacy. He walked closer to Blasowitz, close enough that the German general could see the rage in those pale eyes, the disgust, the pure, unfiltered contempt. So no, General, I will not give you your firing squad. I will not give you your soldier's death. I will not help you preserve your delusion that you are somehow honorable. You're going to live. You're going to go home. And every day for the rest of your life, you're going to remember this conversation. You're going to remember that your enemy had more honor than you did." Blasowitz felt tears, actual tears, burning in his eyes. He hadn't cried since he was a child. A German officer does not cry. A Prussian general does not break. But he was breaking now. "Please," he whispered. "I am begging you. The pistol is on the desk. 1 bullet. That is all I ask. I will not resist. I will face it. Just, please, have mercy." Patton studied him for a long moment. The anger seemed to drain from his face, replaced by something that might have been pity, or sadness, or simply weariness. "You really don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. "You think the worst thing I can do is kill you. But that's easy. Death is easy. It's living with what you've done that's hard." He turned to his aide. "Captain, have the MPs take the general into custody. Standard processing. Make sure he gets food, water, medical attention if he needs it. By the book." "Yes, sir." "And Captain, make sure he's treated well. Professional courtesy. He's a prisoner of war, not a criminal. Not yet, anyway." The aide saluted and left the room. 2 military policemen entered, young men with that same casual American confidence. Blasowitz stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. This couldn't be the end. This couldn't be his fate. To be treated well. To be processed. To survive. "Wait," he said desperately. "General Patton, please, I am asking you, as one soldier to another." Patton held up a hand, silencing him. And then he did something that would haunt Blasowitz far more than any bullet could have. He came to attention. Slowly. Deliberately. The ramrod posture of a professional soldier. His heels clicked together with Prussian precision. His right hand rose in a crisp military salute. An American general saluting a captured German officer. It was perfect. Textbook. Exactly the kind of professional courtesy that Blasowitz had dreamed of. The respect of one warrior for another. The acknowledgement of honor. And it destroyed him. Because in that moment, Blasowitz understood what Patton was doing. He wasn't offering respect. He wasn't acknowledging honor. He was showing Blasowitz what real honor looked like. What real professionalism demanded. What it meant to be a soldier who served something greater than himself. Patton held the salute for a long moment, his blue eyes locked on Blasowitz's face. Then he dropped his hand and turned to leave. "Wait!" Blasowitz's voice was barely a whisper. "Why? Why did you salute? After everything you said, after you told me I had no honor, why would you?" Patton paused at the door, his back to the German general. "Because," he said quietly, "somebody in this room had to remember what it means to be a professional soldier. Somebody had to show that honor isn't conditional. That you don't stop being a gentleman because your enemy is a bastard. That's what separates us from you, General. We don't forget who we are, even when we're fighting monsters." He looked back over his shoulder, and his expression was almost kind, almost gentle. "You asked me to treat you like a soldier, so I did. But you're going to spend the rest of your life realizing that you never really understood what that meant." And with that, he left. The MPs moved forward, polite but firm, guiding Blasowitz toward the door. He went without resistance, his mind reeling, his world collapsing not with the violence of artillery, but with the quiet devastation of understanding. As they led him down the stairs, past American soldiers who barely glanced at him, past the jeeps and half-tracks and all the casual machinery of victory, Blasowitz replayed that salute over and over in his mind. Perfect form, perfect execution. The acknowledgement of one professional to another. But it wasn't a gift. It was a mirror. It forced Blasowitz to see himself as Patton saw him, a man who had worn the uniform of honor while serving dishonor, a man who had demanded respect while enabling the unforgivable, a man who had confused discipline with morality, orders with conscience, duty with righteousness. Patton's salute said, "This is what you should have been. This is what you failed to be. This is what real honor looks like." And living with that knowledge would be worse than any bullet. The American soldiers loaded him into a truck with other prisoners. Wehrmacht officers, most of them, sitting in silence, defeated men contemplating uncertain futures. They didn't speak. What was there to say? As the truck rumbled away from the building, Blasowitz looked back one final time. He could see Patton standing at the window, watching them go, a silhouette against the afternoon light, still standing at attention, still the perfect soldier. Everything Blasowitz had pretended to be, and everything he had never truly achieved. The truck turned a corner and the image was gone, but it would never leave Blasowitz's mind. Act 5. The Legacy. General Hans Blasowitz lived for 42 more years. He was processed through the American POW system, interrogated, evaluated, and eventually cleared of direct war crimes. The interrogators found him exactly what he claimed to be, a professional officer who had commanded combat units in conventional warfare. He had not participated in the Holocaust, had not commanded execution squads, had not ordered atrocities. He had simply done his duty. They released him in 1947, sent him back to what remained of Germany, to a country that no longer existed in any recognizable form. The Reich was gone, the cities were rubble, the army was disbanded. Everything he had known, everything he had served, had been erased. He returned to Bavaria, to a small apartment in a town that had been mostly spared by the bombing. He got a job as a clerk, lived quietly, kept his head down. Like millions of other former Wehrmacht officers, he tried to blend into the gray, defeated landscape of post-war Germany. He never spoke about his service. When people asked, he would simply say he had been in the army. Which army? The Wehrmacht. Rank? He would change the subject. Friends and neighbors learned not to press. That generation was full of men with pasts they didn't discuss, memories they tried to forget. But Blasowitz couldn't forget. Every morning he would stand before his bathroom mirror to shave, and he would remember Patton's salute. The perfect form, the deliberate respect, the devastating message encoded in that simple gesture. He tried to tell himself that he had been a good soldier, that he had followed orders, that he had done his duty. The same arguments he had made to Patton, the same justifications that millions of German officers made to themselves and their families and their God. But the salute haunted him, because Patton had shown him what he could have been, what he should have been, the kind of soldier who serves honor rather than policy, who maintains principles even in service to evil, who chooses death over complicity. Blasowitz had not been that soldier. He had chosen survival. He had chosen obedience. He had chosen to believe that he could remain honorable while serving dishonor, that he could keep his hands clean while the machinery of genocide operated around him. And George Patton had shown him with a single salute that this belief was a lie. Years passed. Germany rebuilt. The economic miracle transformed the rubble into cities again. A new generation grew up, one that asked uncomfortable questions about what their parents and grandparents had done during the war. The trials continued, though slowly. The reckoning was coming, though it would take decades. Blasowitz watched it all with a strange detachment. He read about Nuremberg, about the trials of concentration camp guards and SS officers, about the slow, painful process of Germany confronting its past. He wondered sometimes if he should have been in the dock alongside them, not because he had committed their crimes, but because he had made their crimes possible, because he had been the respectable face of an unrespectable regime, because he had fought honorably in service to dishonor. In 1970, a journalist found him, young, ambitious, writing a book about Wehrmacht officers who had served on the Eastern Front. The journalist wanted interviews, wanted to understand how professional soldiers had reconciled their training with the reality of the war they had fought. Blasowitz almost refused. But something made him agree. Perhaps after all these years, he wanted to speak, to explain, to be understood. They met in a cafe in Munich. The journalist asked careful questions, took notes, treated him with respect, and for an hour, Blasowitz told his story, his career, his service, his capture. Then he told the journalist about Patton. He described the room in Bavaria, the American general sitting on the desk, the conversation that had stripped away every justification, every excuse, every comfortable lie he had told himself. And finally, he described the salute. The journalist's pen stopped moving. He saluted you? After he told you all that? After he condemned everything you stood for? Yes. Why would he do that? Blasowitz was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee, seeing the scene replay itself in his mind for the 10,000th time. Because, he said finally, he was showing me what I should have been. He was more of a Prussian officer than I ever was, more honorable than I could ever claim to be. He maintained his principles even when his enemy didn't deserve them. That was the point. That was the punishment. Punishment? He let you live? Exactly. Blasowitz looked up, and the journalist saw something in the old man's eyes. Not tears, but a deep, endless sadness. He gave me something worse than death. He gave me clarity. He made me see myself as I really was. And then he made me live with that knowledge. The journalist's article was published the following year. It caused a minor stir in Germany, where the question of Wehrmacht culpability was still being debated. Some readers were moved by Blasowitz's honesty. Others condemned him for trying to excuse his service. Still others questioned whether the story was even true. But Patton's biographers confirmed it. The general had indeed had a habit of saluting captured enemy officers, particularly those he judged to have fought professionally. It was part of his personal code, his belief in military courtesy, his sense that honor transcended politics. Whether he had intended the salute as the devastating psychological attack that Blasowitz described, or simply as a professional courtesy, would never be clear. Patton himself had died in 1945, killed in a car accident just months after the war ended, never able to confirm or deny the story. But the effect on Blasowitz was undeniable. He died in 1987 at the age of 78. His obituary was brief. Former Wehrmacht officer, survived by a daughter and 2 grandchildren. No mention of his rank or service. No detail about his capture or his fate. But his daughter would later tell interviewers that in his final days, as age and illness caught up with him, he had spoken often about a meeting in 1945. About an American general. About a perfect salute that had haunted him for 4 decades. He said it was the worst punishment anyone could have given him, she recalled. He said being forced to live with the knowledge of what he had become was harder than any death could have been. And perhaps that was Patton's real genius in that moment. He understood that honor is not just about how you treat those who deserve it. It's about who you are when no one is watching. What you do when it costs you nothing to do wrong and everything to do right. Patton maintained his code even when facing a man who had enabled evil, even when that man begged for a bullet, even when mercy would have been easier than the burden of insight. He showed Blasowitz what real honor looked like, and in doing so, he achieved something no firing squad could have accomplished. He destroyed the Nazi ideology more completely than any bomb, because the core of that ideology was the belief that strength trumps morality, that power justifies itself, that the winner writes the rules and the loser deserves no consideration. Patton's salute said, no. It said, honor is not conditional. Principle is not situational. Being a professional soldier means being a moral person first and a warrior second. It said, you can defeat your enemy and still respect the uniform they wear, even if they disgraced it. And most devastatingly, it said, this is what you could have been if you had chosen differently, if you had valued principle over obedience, if you had been brave enough to say no. General Blasowitz spent 42 years living with that message. 42 years of looking in the mirror and seeing not what he was, but what he could have been, should have been. 42 years is a long time to serve a sentence, and perhaps that's the real lesson of this story. Not that war is hell, or that following orders is dangerous, or that evil regimes corrupt everyone they touch. We know these things already. The lesson is simpler and harder. Sometimes mercy is the cruelest punishment. Sometimes survival is harder than death. And sometimes the worst thing you can do to a man is not to kill him, but to show him who he really is, and then make him live with that knowledge. General George S. Patton understood this. He understood that true honor demands consistency, that you don't abandon your principles because your enemy lacks them, that being better than your adversary means actually being better, not just claiming to be. In that room in Bavaria, in those few minutes of conversation, he gave a captured German general exactly what he deserved. Not death, truth, and the obligation to live with it. The rest of us would do well to remember that lesson. In our own times, our own conflicts, our own moral compromises, we are all, in some way, General Blasowitz. We all serve systems larger than ourselves. We all follow orders we don't fully question. We all do our duty and tell ourselves it's enough. But it isn't enough. It was never enough. Honor demands more. Morality demands more. Being fully human demands more. It demands that we choose, that we think, that we refuse when refusal is required, even if it costs us everything. Patton knew this. He lived it. Even in victory, even in the moment of total triumph over a hated enemy, he maintained his code. He saluted a man who didn't deserve it, because honor isn't about what others deserve. It's about who you are. That's the legacy. That's the lesson. And it's one we can't afford to forget.